Today we're going to be focusing on how to create a good composition and taking a look at the work of George Ames Aldrich. So when we think about what grabs our attention when we're looking at a painting, it's usually the big, simple shapes and masses. What makes the painting strong is the contrast between those big, simple shapes and masses. Now, you might think it's color. In color, it can really grab your attention if the color is kind of garish, doesn't harmonize. That'll jump out and grab your attention real quick. But it's mostly the big, simple shapes. The fewer shapes, the better, and the strong contrast between them and how they're arranged that grabs our attention. In other words, what grabs our attention is a good composition and strong value contrast before anything else. Because I can have very muted, limited color, but if I have a good design of the shapes and values, then it's going to grab my attention. So I want to talk about three things or keys that you can think about to create a better composition. And there's a lot more than this, but these three I think are kind of key to coming up with good compositions. One is lines and patterns. Two is big shapes and masses. And three is simplicity, simplify. And again, there's more than that, but I want to focus on those three. And we'll be looking at the artwork of George Ames Aldrich. He's an American artist, 1872 to 1941. Interesting story behind him. He went to the Art Students League and studied with William Merritt Chase, but then he went to Europe and studied with Fritz Thalo, probably mispronouncing his name, a Norwegian painter, very well known, and a great painter of water, streams and rivers. And you can see here his water, very well done and very reminiscent of Fritz's paintings. So he studied with him for quite a while and then came back to the US. He struggled with manic depression and some alcoholism too, which I probably go hand in hand a little bit. But he was very prolific, painting his whole life. It didn't keep him from painting. And I think he sold fairly well despite some periods of struggling financially. But looking at his paintings, he really designed or composed his paintings really well. And let's look first at the number one key, which would be lines and patterns. And by lines, I mean the edges of shapes. They create lines. So if you look at the edge of the snow, here between the snow and the river or the water, that creates a line. And that line goes up here, picks up the line of the tree trunk and the tree branch and the edges of these lines of the snow against the background trees, picking up the tree trunk again. So it's following all these lines and moves the eye around and then out the bottom of the painting again. And that's what you want to do. You want to use these lines and patterns to move the eye around. And by pattern, I mean the dark and the light shapes that our eye picks up and follows around the composition. Like the white snow, there's the pattern of these clumps of winter grass or clumps here, and you pick up the clumps of the bank in the snow. That's a pattern of dark against the light snow that kind of pulls your eye around, and you pick up lines again. So a lot of different ways he's using here to pull the eye around, and it's really helpful. Now, these keys or these ideas of moving the viewer's eye around, it's not that the viewer knows, has a written list of how to look at a painting. I'm going to look for the lines and patterns and how they've simplified shapes and big masses. But when you have strong lines like here, and you have strong pattern of dark and the white snow like that, your eye just naturally follows it to some degree. And I think the absence of that, without thinking about how to pull the eye around, you can run the viewer's eye right off the canvas and you just kind of lose interest really without knowing it. So if these trees were not here to kind of stop the eye on the line here between the water and the snow, if those trees weren't there, your eye would just run off the side and off the canvas, and you kind of lose interest. But as it is, the line here is picked up by the line of the tree trunks, line of the branch. So you might think, well, he probably just painted what he saw, and it could have been. Could have been that's just what he saw. But it's very well designed. Whether he saw it or not, he looked for things to paint that I think would move the eye around. And I read after his trip to Europe, he came back with a lot of sketches, drawings to paint from, but then even after those were gone, he was just using memory and making up things that he remembered seeing and creating compositions, thinking about these three ideas of how to create a good composition. So you can also create your own design. Maybe put the camera down and just try and paint from memory, thinking about using lines and patterns to move the eye around. And I say that, I'm preaching to myself. I should try that more often, at least as an exercise to kind of sharpen your compositional skills. But that's lines and patterns. The next is big shapes and masses. And that's the idea of keeping your painting simple by using big shapes. So 4 to 8 big shapes is kind of an ideal thing to do for a landscape. John Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting. It's really good if you haven't read it. If you can only read one book on landscape painting, that would probably be it. Maybe on painting, period. It's a really good book. Anyway, he talks about designing your canvas, your composition, with 4 to 6 big shapes. And I can run over to 4 to 8 maybe. But you start getting more than that, it starts to get too busy. If you have 15, 20 shapes in your composition, you're breaking it up with too much detail. And the eye gets lost looking at a painting like that. So George here has big, simple shapes: shape of the water, shape of the snow, shape of the trees in the background, snow on the background hills, sky, and tree shape. So I don't know, 5, 6 big shapes there. And then having one area or 2 areas where he has the most detail. So he doesn't have detail everywhere. That would break it up. You would lose your big shapes. He's got detail right in here, a little bit back in here, and that's about it. He does work the water pretty well, but it's not a lot of little tiny strong value changes like in the tree area here or in the background. So keeping it simple, or keeping the shapes few, 4 to 8 big shapes. Try not to break them up. The minute you start to lose your shapes, you'll lose your composition. And his shapes stand out real well. And the last one is kind of what I just talked about, simplifying. Keep everything simple. Reduce your areas of detail to 1, maybe 2. Keep everything big and simple. And that just makes your painting easier to read. So looking at some more here of George's paintings. Beautiful job with color too. His color, very harmonious, very nice. And I imagine, just thinking about a good composition helps you kind of make things up. Not that that's my goal, is to make up. I like to paint what I see, looking at in God's creation and just painting it using my sense of color and kind of designing. But if you know design well, if you can compose well, you can make what you're looking at better, or you can make up your own composition and make it work. And again, it's got strong lines here, really busy in here, but that busyness works because everything else is real simple. The snow is simple, dark and light pattern. The sky is a simple light value. Everything else is simplified, and this is the one area of detail. And that always works better if you can keep your detail limited. Detail is good. I think it describes these branches that are kind of laden with snow really well, but too much detail everywhere will destroy the composition. So keep those simplified. Nice sense of light. Here's a night scene. Looks like from Europe. Get good, simple shapes. Got lines here, subtle lines. It's not a real strong line. And the line here of the building, um, patterns of dark and light in the windows and doorways kind of lead you in. But these lines kind of, they don't have to literally connect, but there's enough lines intersecting there that kind of moves or pulls your eye along pretty well. In this one, and I've seen this area painted by several other artists before, somewhere in Europe, I don't know where. But again, great job on the water. A lot of small value changes in the water. That's his big area of detail. Everything else kept real simple. The pattern of snow and the steps, the darker steps, lighter snow creates a pattern of leading you up. And here, of course, the line also of the water and the bridge area kind of pulls you around. But this, the lines here, the path up the steps. So there's several different areas of lines and pattern that kind of move your eye around. But the strongest is right in here, either right here or here. That really pulls your eye in and moves it around, or it can come up here. A lot of different ways of moving the eye around. And he does it really, really well. And I like the busyness that's up front, but then the simplicity in the background helps. If he gets too much detail everywhere, it's gonna fall apart. Same area, it looks like, maybe a different view. But again, the line here, the bank, moving you in and around and just all over. Just easier to look at a painting like that when it pulls you in instead of blocking you off or running you off the sides. And you can also play with edges to move their eye around. He's not using a variety of hard and soft edges very much. It's mostly hard, but hard and soft edges will also, you can direct the eye that way. Same view, just a different time of day. But the same thing here as the last one. The eye is pulled in. There's the detail in the water, some in the building, but not too much. The big shapes and value changes are simple and makes for a much stronger painting. The more simple your painting as far as detail, simplify the detail, keep your shapes bigger and less detailed, then the stronger the design will be. But the more detail in the big shapes, the weaker the design comes. And some artists really focus on the design and have hardly any detail at all, and that really makes the design stand out. Those are paintings that are more design oriented. Here's one a little busier. Shapes aren't as big and as simple, a lot more detail, but he does have a lot of nice lines here. And usually you want to start at the bottom, but you can pick up all kinds of stuff here to move the eye around. But it is busier, but the lights stand out, fairly simple. Dark pattern, you can really see the dark pattern in here is very strong. And that dark pattern can move your eye around too. Your eye really follows this line here and the dark shapes. So a lot of different things you can think about to pull the eye in and around. And if you can vary the shapes and the big masses so they're not all the same size and not all centered, you want to stagger them and then keep it simple, much easier to read. It's a nice night scene. He did paint and live in Chicago for a while, as well as Illinois, other places in Illinois and in the Midwest, Indiana. But good contrast, nice, simple, big shapes, even though there's some subtle changes between the light on the smoke gradually turns to dark, and the dark buildings back in here gradually get a little lighter. There's a lot of gradual, subtle value changes, but you want to keep it big and simple first. So before you start trying to get the subtlety, like the white smoke here has one, two, three different values in it. Same thing with the kind of yellowish smoke. It's got about 4 or 5 different values in it. Before you get to those subtle changes, value changes, you want to see it real simple, because that's what's going to make the composition hold up. So I kind of pulled it together. This is how you want to see it before you start creating the subtlety, maybe coming up with a value, between those two, between these two, or just softening edges so they blend one into the other. A little bit of both, probably. Before you do the subtlety, you have to see it big and simple like this. That's going to make, again, the composition work before you start adding too much subtlety. If you try for this subtlety, which is real nice, the smoke gradually blending into this smoke and it blends into the buildings, several value changes, you have to see it like that first. Then you can do the blending and introducing other subtle value changes. This is what makes the composition. It's another one of his, a little more broken up, but still holds together real well. A lot of detail in some of these areas, but the simplicity in the other areas is real strong. And the lines, even though he's using a lot of soft edges here, the lines on the bank really pull you in to the composition. And these strong dark lines of the tree trunks back in here kind of move you around. A little bit of a circular composition there. Nice color. It's a nice sense of light. See the time of day. There's a lot of detail there, but the detail doesn't destroy the big shapes. The big green shape here isn't lost, or here, because of all the detail. Easy to do, though, to lose it. So less is always more when it comes to the detail. Another nice one. A lot of subtle color change and value change in the water. Hard to do. But again, seeing it in more simple masses and shapes. Fewer colors and value changes at first. So I could see blocking this in, all the same value in here. The light value, and then all a darker value in there. Just picking a color and value that best shows those two big shapes. Then adding the other colors, the violet in there, the yellow, orange, greens, all the other colors you see in there that are real subtle. Add them wet into wet to get the subtlety. But don't start with subtlety. Start with big, simple shapes. And of course, the lines here are very nice. A lot of little lines to pull your eye along. Now this one's mine, Colorado, a while back. And here I've got 2 ways to kind of pull it in. The pattern of the shrubbery and the fence posts there kind of pull you back in there, and then also the line of the bank there pulls you in. This is kind of my focal point. So both of these kind of lead you to the background. In fact, all of these lines kind of lead to the center of interest there. And it's nice to have it, I think, meander a bit instead of just a straight line with the fence posts. Have it meander a bit more. I can kind of take its time. Could have even done a bit more meandering around. It just pulls the viewer on a little bit more of a journey. Now in this one, I've got a lot of lines and patterns, the lines of the fallen tree trunks, kind of pulling up here over to the kind of the focal point. Tree trunks weren't there. I added them again just to pull you in from the foreground. I could have used just these dark accents to create kind of pattern or a line that pulls you around. And it helps not to be too obvious. You don't want a definite path or road in every painting leading you to your focal point if you have one. So try and make it more subtle where you can. And then the big simple shapes. Even though I have a lot of broken up color change, like in the hillside here and in the grass here, it's not much of a value change. This is all still pretty dark. just different colors. Same thing here. I do have some value change in this shadowed foreground, but they're all in the shadow and they kind of hold together. But I want to see this when I block it in more like this. Before I start seeing the subtle color changes in the foreground or the hill back in there, or any subtle color changes in the trees, I want to see it in these big, simple masses first, because that's what's going to make the composition. Then as I add more detail, I can kind of make sure I don't add so much that I lose those big shapes and ruin the composition. Here's another one here. I'm using, the river was here, using the river to kind of move the eye in and around to the composition there. Your eye also is drawn to strong contrast, which would be, right in here is a real strong contrast, and here around the focal point. Your eye can go there first because that's what draws you right away, is the strongest contrast, and then it picks up these lines that pulls you in and around. And I've read some articles recently, kind of debunks this idea that you have to create a composition, that using lines and pattern and shapes and using them in such a way that moves the viewer's eye around isn't anything to think about. But I disagree. I think it's kind of obvious, but it's just that idea of just deconstructing everything. Anything that creates a good painting or that might be seen as some kind of a formula is just distrusted and done away with. Everything's just deconstructed that has anything to do with the past. So I really disagree with that. And here I'm using this creek was here, using it, making it show up a bit more in the background. It didn't show up in the background when I was there. Again, leading me to the focal point. And then also these tree trunks kind of pulling the eye around and going back. And using these vertical shapes here to break up these long horizontal lines here that just break up the canvas from one side to the other. So the trees, I added a few more just to break it up a lot more so that the horizontal lines don't take over and just chop up the painting too much. And then the pattern of the leaves against the dark shadows in the mountains gives a nice value contrast, but also complementary color contrast, a kind of bluish violet against the yellow orange. Gives a lot of stronger value and color contrast there. And lastly, this one. This one has real strong lines. Of course, they're straight tree trunks just leading you right into the focal point area there. But that's what I wanted. And then these lines too, leading you down. All these kind of lines converge there. So thinking through that, plus, the lines here, kind of all these kind of go towards this area, which I think strengthens the composition and still allows you to kind of move your eye around quite a bit in here, picking up these lines. So helps to think about that. And again, it's lines and patterns, shapes and masses, and lastly, simplify. Don't break all those things up with too much detail.